nourishing, numerous, nonfiction. It's my November wrap-up. Aloha, I'm Marilyn, Maya, the baby boomer booktuber, and welcome back to my channel. This is my November wrap-up, and boy, it's been quite the journey. I want to talk first about the books that I didn't finish, because I finished so many books this month despite having a lot of bad things happen. I lost my dog. My daughter lost her dog a few months ago. So I didn't think I'd be reading this much, but I did. One of the books that I put aside this month was Gulag by Anne Applebaum. And I didn't put it aside because it was a thick book, which it is. I put it aside because it was full of sadness and I wasn't ready to tackle it. One of my favorite books this year was On the Landing by Yenta Mosh, where she talks about the gulags. And since I hadn't read the Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, I decided that I wanted to get more into it. And I did get quite far into this book, but when it started talking about triggering things like assaults on women, and yeah, I had to put it down. It's a very complete, researched, important book about Stalin and how he set up the gulags on these islands off of Russia. I didn't know too much about it. I know a lot now, but I'm not ready to finish it. But it's a book that I'm going to get back to. I love Pico Iyer, and I decided to read him again for Nonfiction November. So I started with Video Night in Katmandu, and it's dated, but it was his first book, and it talks about the globalization, or really the or westernization of all these countries that he went to, including Katmandu. I'm sure it's much worse now. This was written in 1988, and he has a wonderful style of writing that is so, it's so poetic and yet so readable that this is one of the books that gave me courage to go to places like Japan and the Philippines when I went in 1990. So I think it's dated, but I think it's still relevant. So I'm going to give this 4 stars. A book that was more successful and less successful is Pico Iyer's book from 2004, Sun After Dark. These essays are magnificent, but some of them are really sad, and this is where I had some problems. I'm giving this book 4 stars. It starts out with an essay about Leonard Cohen, who I didn't know too much about, and how he really was a Zen master, or he worked with a monk, and he sort of became a monk, which I didn't know anything about, and made me want to learn about him. And he also has an essay about the Dalai Lama and about kindness. So it's a lot of them are essays about some people I didn't know, C. Bold, and I haven't read that essay yet because I want to know more about him. But the one essay that he talks also about La Paz, Bolivia, and this is where Sun After Dark. One of the most haunting essays for me was a haunted house of treasures about Cambodia and the genocide that happened. But it's not only about the genocide. He went there in 1999, and this was like 20 years later, because the genocide happened in 1975 to 79. I had been very wary about reading anything about Cambodia's genocide. I didn't even want to see The Killing Fields when it came out. But reading this essay made me go down the rabbit hole of learning, because I think that all genocides have to be remembered. And this one was a very strange, what happened was very, very unnecessary, like all genocides, of course, but very strange. And nobody really knew about it, or if they did know, nobody wanted to do anything. This was around the time of the end of Vietnam, and nobody really cared. I want to read you a little of what he says about Cambodia. In the other old monuments of the world, Machu Picchu, the pyramids of Yucatan and Egypt, Rome, I had been forcibly reminded how insensitive I am to history. They were living places, certainly, charred with the memories of all that had taken place. But I had left there feeling that they were of interest mainly to historians or sightseers. Anger, however, was different. It was alive, for one thing, electric, with the unburied presence of the jungle all around. The soil, the long ago workers who had built temples across an area twice the size of Manhattan, and the blood-soaked fields on every side. Anger was a shrill white whine of cicada bells issuing from the trees, and the little girl who put a pink water pistol in her mouth and pulled the trigger. At times there is an overpowering sense of Eden to anger, the virgin light falling through the trees, the homes on stilts above the green paddies, the water buffalo clumping along immemorably beside Tawny Sap Lake. But look a little closer and you notice a one-legged man hobbling toward you with a dirty cup extended, or a swan-necked girl following your every movement from afar. This gives you a little idea about his writing and how intense it is, how clear it is. And I'm going to go into that when I talk about other books. But I really suggest, even though this is also a bit dated, I really suggest that you read Pico Iyer. And that goes into the third book, and it's not by him, but it's called Journeys Home. It's a National Geographic book about inspiring stories plus tips and strategies to find your family history. And Pico Iyer is one of the contributors to that. And I just read his story, and I also learned a little bit about genealogy, which I was interested in. I'm going to talk about some books that didn't work as well for me, and for this one, it's called The Wellness Project by Phoebe Lapine, and I kind of renamed it as The Well Off Project, because if you were to do any of the things that she recommends, you have to be rich. In fact, in the back, there's an appendix about all the things she did and all the people she had to see, wellness people, designing your bathroom cabinet with prices, really, you have to be really rich to get well, according to her. Don't get me wrong, she writes very well and she tries to be inclusive. Also, she talks, it's sort of a memoir in a way, because she has Hashimoto's thyroid condition. So a lot of these things are that she went to look for a cure, and I really respect that. She went to a lot of people that many people who are, for example, on government insurance wouldn't be able to go to. And there's a picture of her showing that she really looks good. So she says she's healed. and she didn't want to stop. It says, how I learned to do right by my body without giving up my life. But in my view, she did give up her life, or more of her life than I would want to give up mine. She gave up so many different kinds of foods. Some of them, she even admits, weren't necessary according to doctors and for her illness. She gave up mostly alcohol. She gave up gluten, period. I think she gave up sweets also. She gave up, she talks about prime, the meat diet a little bit. So she hasn't given up meat totally, but it's just very complicated. I mean, it makes you feel like to get well, you have to not only have a bunch of money, but you have to give up so many things. So I don't know, she said she didn't give up her life, but to me, she did go on a journey, and I respect that. But no, this book was not for me. So I gave it 2 stars. Another book that worked a little better for me was Natural Beauty from the Outside In by Sojourner Walker Williams. This is an all-natural book. And at first I thought it wasn't going to work for me because she does everything with natural products, you know, makeup, everything. Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. But in the end, you know, she talks about different places that was very interesting, like aloe vera. I have plants of aloe vera, so I maybe can do something with that. And she goes to different places, and that's interesting. So it's sort of like, it says 70 plus recipes for all skin and hair types. Beauty secrets from around the world. Easy to find ingredients. Inspired by Ayurvedic practices. And I want to go back to the Wellness Project, because I forgot to say one of the most important things is that Phoebe Lapine is a blogger, and she was a cook. So she has recipes in this book, and there was a recipe that I really liked from this book. So it says, with 22 inflammation-fighting recipes for clearer skin, better digestion, and a thriving thyroid. So yeah, I liked some of the recipes, but I didn't like that that this is not a book for everyone. So I give this one 2.5 stars, this one 2 stars. And then we come to a book that I'm giving 3.5 stars. It's Leave Me Alone, I'm Reading, Finding and Losing Myself in Books. And I was very excited about this because I love books about books. And this woman, Maureen Corrigan, she is a perceptive book critic. So she's from NPR. So if you wonder about the secret life of bookworms, this is the book that will open up the rich rewards of going around with your nose stuck in a book. Now, isn't that great for booktubers? What I didn't like about this book was that she spoils a lot of books in it. So you have to be careful if you want to read some of the very good books that she does read. She talks a lot about, in her memoir, about adopting children from China, I think. So yeah, that was interesting. She has a few books about that, and there's a reading list. But yeah, I was afraid to read it because I didn't want to get spoiled. I talked a lot about Barbara Sher and how much she's helped me in my last video with her book Wishcraft. And so I went back to my library to see what else she wrote that I read. And the least successful one was It's Only Too Late If You Don't Start Now, How to Create Your Second Life After 40. When she wrote this, I think 40 was considered like 60 now. She wrote it in 1998. And it's very dated. And I don't think it has much more to offer than she did in Wishcraft. The other book that I got out of the library was Live the Life You Love in 10 Easy Step-by-Step Lessons. This was a little more successful to me, and it was written in 1999. So it's not much, and I like that it's in 10 steps, so you can really get a lot out of it, because I like that. I like something that's, well, this book, the one I talked about, It's Only Too Late, was, a lot of it was philosophical, how she felt about, age and time limits, and you are not the favorite. So it's sort of talking about, things that we sort of know about, that we're not going to live forever, but it doesn't really tell you much until the end about what to do about it. Well, this one, the 10 Easy Steps, was easier as a workable kind of book. But I still say that Wishcraft is the best book of all of her books. Though I did order a book called The Idea Book, so I will review that later. So I have to give all these books 3.5 stars. The other book that I read was It Wasn't Your Fault by Beverly Engel. Freeing yourself from the shame of childhood abuse with the power of self-compassion. And she talks a lot about shame. Is one of the most destructive of human emotions. If you suffered childhood emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, you may experience such debilitating shame, self-criticism, and self-doubt. So this, what I liked about this is that she goes step by step in helping with all these different, and her cure is compassion. And I really, really get that, because self-compassion is so important. And so I gave this 4 stars. The next book that I'm going to talk about is Hunger by Roxane Gay. I never read Bad Feminist, and I don't know too much about Roxane Gay, but I did read her memoir. And this is Hunger, a memoir of my body. And what it says is that Roxane Gay addresses the experience of living in a body that she calls wildly undisciplined. So she's obese or super obese. And it's a story of how she deals with the world and how this came about. So I want to say first that I respect her experiences, and she talks about basically when she was 11 years old, she was assaulted, and that's when she started gaining weight to protect herself. And I understand that, because I was also assaulted on my 19th birthday, and I gained a lot of weight for most of my life. Not to the point that I was super obese, but I was almost 200 pounds. So I do understand what she's talking about. But I also write memoir, and I have to be honest and tell you my experiences with this book. Let me just say that before I even attempted to make this, talk about this, I consulted someone who's I respect on BookTube. I won't give out their name, but I wanted to know if my feelings were correct or how they felt about it, and so I could put my feelings about this book into perspective. And I will say one thing. I write memoir, like I said, and I'm older than Roxane Gay is. So there are some rules, and that, believe me, they're not rules like you got to do this and you got to do that. They're rules that will help you write a memoir. And one of those rules is you have to be ready to tell people your pain. Alluding to it or saying, I can't talk about it, it's too terrible, is meaning you're not ready to talk about it and you're not ready to write a book about it. And that's the way I felt about her. There's other reasons that don't apply to this, like writing for revenge purposes, and or writing a book about just your pain and not really telling a story, because people, I guess I'm wrong about this because everybody liked it, but I felt that she wasn't giving me enough information and wasn't telling me a story. It felt like blog posts. And I think she started with a blog. And what I wrote down, she says it's her refrain, and she does this all through the book. I don't know how things got so out of control, or I do. This is my refrain. I don't know how to talk about rape and sex, violence. It is easier to say something terrible happened. I want to lose weight and be happy and free. I wish I know why, or I do know why. So these are scattered throughout the book. We know something terrible happened, and she gets very close to telling us what happened. She gets very close. It's almost like it's going to happen at the end as sort of a climax, but it doesn't. And as a reader of memoir, I think that she was, to say something terrible happened, of course we know something terrible happened. And if something terrible happens, we have to be ready to tell our audience in a scene, in my opinion, what happened. And she does, she says, I'm not going to tell you. And then she does end up sort of telling us. So until she doesn't really tell us the whole thing, but something really terrible happened when you're raped at 11 years old. And when you gain weight to hide, to become less desirable to men, I wasn't aware that I was doing that. I thought I was just doing it for comfort. But there's a lot in here. It needed editing, in my opinion. It needed more of a story narrative arc. But I will say that she does have some poetic writing in her words, and I appreciated that. It was an easy read. It wasn't very dense reading, and yet there was a lot here that I felt could have been written in a way that we could really understand better how she deals with being a big woman in a small world. And I think she has a lot of contradictions in the book, and that's okay. But like I said, I was a little confused. So I only gave this 3 stars. And this is, like, most people give this 5 stars. I think that she's very brave. All memoirists are brave to write things down. But I think it needed a little work. So that's my opinion. So, like everyone says, if you don't agree with my opinion, everybody has their own right to their own opinion. And I shouldn't even say that because that's self-explanatory. But it's very hard to criticize somebody's life in a memoir. So, so I'm not criticizing her life at all or what happened to her. I honor her as I honor myself, but I just think the book could have been done better. Another memoir that I felt could have been done better or have waited a while longer is Made in China by Anna Q. Sorry if I'm messing up the name. And the beginning of the book hooked me really well. It's about a girl who's brought up in China by her grandmother. She barely sees her mother, who left to go to New York and with her husband opened up a sweatshop. And when she's finally sent for, her mother had remarried the man who owned the sweatshop, and she was treated as a second-hand citizen, basically, in the family. She was abused by her mother. Her mother was very abusive, and she made her work in the sweatshop. And in the beginning, like I said, I was hooked because of the tale of abuse that I'm familiar with, and the tale of working in a sweatshop, which I'm not familiar with. So it was very interesting to learn about all the people that she worked with and how hard they had to work and how many hours they worked for very little money. So that part was interesting. Then I think she lost her way toward the middle of the book, and she goes on to college. She fights with her mother. Her mother throws her out. I don't want to really spoil the book for anyone. There's a long part in the end that could have been completely cut out. I feel didn't have anything to do with the book. And also, the worst thing about this book was she tried to rehabilitate her mother by, toward the end of the book, she starts telling her mother's story. Well, my mother worked, when she came to America, she had to work in a sweatshop, and it didn't work because she had made her mother, I don't say she had made her mother, but her mother was portrayed as such like a Cinderella story, like the wicked, it wasn't even like she was her mother, the way she treated her. And then all of a sudden, she's trying to rehabilitate herself, in my opinion, to avoid writing a book that's like a mommy dearest sort of book, but it didn't work. It was too late to rehabilitate her mother by the end. So it started well, but it didn't end well for me. So again, she's a young woman and a very beautiful woman, and I think that she could have waited longer to write the book. And I really love the cover, by the way, with the scissors and the thread. So, you might like this book, but yeah, I didn't like this book. Now for my 5-star reads, and they were wonderful. This is a short book by Anna Quindlen, How Reading Changed My Life. It's really a long essay, and I really, really connected with it. In the beginning, she says something. She comes from a upper middle class background, and I didn't. Yet, we have this in common. Yet there was always in me, even when I was very small, the sense that I ought to be somewhere else. And I've always felt that way. And she talks about having a good childhood, yet feeling that way. She also says something that might be controversial, but maybe it has an ounce of truth in it. Perhaps only a truly discontented child can become as seduced by books as I was. And yet she says she doesn't know why she was discontented. But she read widely, and there's a picture of her in there. And this book was written in 2000, and I think I picked it up once, but I never got through it. But I read this twice. I just read this twice. So it says here, in books I have traveled, not only to other worlds, but into my own. I learned who I was and wanted to be, what I might aspire to, and what I might dare to dream about, my world and myself. So she has a Catholic childhood, Catholic schoolgirl childhood, and that was interesting. What else was interesting was all the books she's read. And she talks about one particular book called the Forsyth Saga, that she was one of her favorite books, and yet when she went to college and she told her professor in a classroom that was her favorite book, he made a very, a remark that was, like crap. And she has a lot to say about what is literary fiction and what people would call genre fiction or women's lit, and how we shouldn't be in the ivory tower or have the canon of books that is only the things that we should read. This is a really good book for anybody who loves readers, who loves to read. And my 5+ star read is Disability Visibility, first-person stories from the 21st century, edited by Alex Wong. I love this book so much. It's a book of essays by different women who are disabled differently. I have so much to say about this book, but I don't want to spoil it for anyone. Not that you can really spoil a book this good. The first essay is by Harriet McBride Johnson, who is very visible in this book because she has not only written a couple of essays here, but she's talked about in the afterwards. And in the first, she's also has the first essay called Unspeakable Conversations. And the first sentence is, he insists he doesn't want to kill me. He simply thinks it would have been better, all things considered, to have given my parents the option of killing the baby I once was, and to let other parents kill similar babies as they come along, and thereby avoid the suffering that comes with lives like mine, and satisfy the reasonable preferences of parents for a different kind of child. It has nothing to do with me. I should not feel threatened. And she has a wonderful premise in this book with this man that she's having a back and forth with, who's a philosopher of, killing children once they're born. And she says, how can he, tell me my life is not a good life? My life is my life. So I was hooked by the first story. It also goes into taking up space. It says, taking up space as a disabled person is always revolutionary. I love that because there's always spaces for other, able-bodied people, but when there's accommodations made for people who have different disabilities, then it's a special thing. When disabled people should have their own spaces, and that's how it ends, with an essay about having your own space. This book talks about all kinds of different kinds of disabilities. Mental illness, having cancer, having prosthetic legs, being hearing impaired. There's even an essay of Incontinence is a Public Health Issue and We Need to Talk About It by Maureen Corrigan. Sorry, I'm butchering everybody's name. And it's about a disabled woman who has the problem of, who has this issue that's not being talked about because it's something that only older people have, and she wants it more talked about. And I felt very seen in a lot of these essays. One about the New York transit system, and that was very comical, but at the same time, it says on New York City's transit, and it's about access to public transportation or special access, and the terrible things that people go through, especially in New York. It's not that bad in Hawaii. I take paratransit in Hawaii, and I have my own stories, but so I really, was seen in that story, but in many other stories about being loud. We're allowed to be loud. So she talks about that the women here, and they're mostly women, though I think there's one man, that disability is mutable, ever evolving. And it's also apparent, we can see it, and sometimes it's non-apparent. So there's, we need to be visible. And in the end, they talk about justice, because disability is political as well. And these women are fighting for justice for disabled people and having their own spaces and being loud. And I think everybody should read this book. I just finished it. I'm going to start it over again before I have to return it to the library, and then I'm probably going to buy my own copy, because this was such an important book for everyone to read. Well, this has been a long wrap up, but I read a lot of books this month. And I hope that you have had a wonderful November and read some nonfiction. Or I also read a fiction book, one fiction book that I'll talk about next time because it's a mystery. And December has a lot of mystery, mystery readathons. But I do hope that you will subscribe to my channel and give it a like and comment and subscribe if you're so inclined. And I'll be back soon. I hope that your holidays, whatever you celebrate, Christmas, Hanukkah, tonight is the first night of Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and every other festival that you celebrate will be full of joy and health and beauty. That's what I wish you. Plus, aloha.